So whether it be in court or your favorite law movie, I'm sure you've heard judges and lawyers referring to Section 5 of a particular act, and you want to know what that means. Stay tuned. In this video I'm going to speak about legislation. First time you're here, I'm David and welcome to my channel, The Legal Journey, where I speak about lifestyle and law. I've been doing a series of videos regarding the sources of law, and in this video I'm going to be speaking on 3 major points regarding legislation as a source of law. Let's start now. So who really is responsible for the making of laws? That's a good question. If you looked at my video on the Constitution, I spoke about 3 arms of governance: the legislature, the judiciary, as well as the executive. So you got it correct. The legislature is responsible for making legislation. Let me explain that. The legislature is really Parliament. Parliament comprises of 2 houses. The lower house, which would be members of Parliament, those persons who we vote into power, our MPs, and then you have the upper house, which would include the senators. Collectively, they are responsible for making laws for the order, peace, and good governance of our country. Laws to benefit us. Now, with that being said, when it comes to legislation, I want us to look at it from 2 categories. One, the main legislation or primary source, and then there's delegated legislation. The main legislation would refer to like acts of parliament, and then delegated legislation would refer to things like regulations and rules and so on. For this video, we're going to be focusing upon acts of parliament. A good example I could probably give you is during the corona pandemic, most governments in the Caribbean, they were relying on what is called the public health ordinance, and that was the main act, and then they were able to make regulations such as restricting the movement of people, determining time and curfews and so. That would be regulations based upon the primary act. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on the act of parliament. Let's move on to point 2. So to explain the structure of acts of parliament, I'm going to be relying on an example that would be applicable to all of the jurisdictions in the Caribbean. I'm going to look at the Domestic Violence Act. Now, I'm not going to go into great details with the Domestic Violence Act because remember, this video is only about legislation as a source of law. But if you were to do a simple Google search, you'll be able to find your particular act. Now, in each of the acts, you would find what is called a short title. That is just the simple, straightforward name of the act. So it's the Domestic Violence Act. Now, beyond that, you're going to see what is called the long title. The long title gives you a little more details as to what this act really is about. So for example, in St. Kitts and Nevis and in Grenada, they speak about the long title being Act to Protect Victims of Domestic Violence, as well as an act to provide protection through a protection order to victims of domestic violence. Those are the short title, the long title. In the act as well, you're going to see what is called an interpretation section that would give like definitions for various terms within the act, and then you're going to see the body of the act that will speak about who could apply other definitions of domestic violence and the orders that the court could make and various other functions. So those are the kind of structures that you would see in these acts. In addition to that, if you look at the one in St. Kitts and Nevis and in Grenada, it's section 37 of the act. You would see where the acts actually provide for the minister to make regulations. And you remember we spoke about that there's the main legislation, which is the act of parliament, and then there's delegated legislation, which provides for regulations. The legislature makes the laws, and then we go to the judiciary to interpret the laws. And in fact, this was one of my favorite topics in law school, which was a while back. The first rule is the literal rule. It means that we look at the natural, technical meaning of the words. Once it's clear and explicit, we just give it the plain meaning. So for example, if you're talking about an act about water, and you're referring to water, yeah, we know what water means, so we give that word water its meaning. Another rule of interpretation is the mischief rule. In fact, I had used this rule very recently in a marijuana case that I had before the court, and I asked the court to consider what was the mischief that Parliament was trying to resolve when they passed the Dangerous Drug Act. And in this particular rule, you look at 4 major points, and it came from a case called the Hayden case. You look at what was the status of the law before the present law existed. Then you look at what was the defect that the former law did not rectify. You then look at what was the remedy that Parliament introduced. And then finally you look at the reason for Parliament introducing this particular law. Now those are two of the rules of interpretation. There are others such as contextual interpretation, and then there's the purposive interpretation. But I just want to look at the final, so before we finish, I just want to look at rules of languages when it comes to interpreting legislation. One of the major points is when you see the word may or shall. When you see the word shall in the legislation, it means that it's a mandatory provision. When you see may, it means that it's discretionary. So those are some of the major points that you need to remember whenever it comes to the interpretation of legislation. Before I end this video, I just want to say thank you guys so much for your positive feedback. Those persons who've been messaging me and telling me that they've been learning new things about the law and I've been able to clarify certain points of law for them. It really goes a long way and I really appreciate your feedback and your support. If you haven't, make sure that you subscribe right at the bottom there, as well as leave a comment telling me how I can improve these videos for your benefit. Thank you once again, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.